They thought they pulled over just another elderly black man on a quiet Georgia backroad. They laughed. Mocked. Searched him like he was nothing. But what they didn't know. That man once rewrote the rules of justice. And with a single phone call, he was about to do it again. This is True Echo, where real stories echo louder than hate. Today's story. Racist cop laughs at black U.S. Army general at court, until he makes one phone call. But what happens next, left a courtroom stunned and a nation watching. Clarence Dupree's fingers remained locked at 10 and 2. His hands didn't tremble, not even a twitch, as the red and blue lights spun violently in the rearview mirror. His left turn signal still blinked, pointlessly now, ticking like a silent clock marking the moment two deputies stepped out of their cruiser. Evelyn, his wife of 42 years, sat composed beside him, her calm presence the anchor he'd always drawn strength from. "Why'd they stop us?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. "Broken tail light," Clarence replied, his jaw tightening. "Except it's not." She nodded once. "Thought so." The deputies approached slowly, one on each side. Clarence cracked the window halfway, offering only what the law required. The taller of the two, with buzzed hair and mirrored glasses, leaned in. His badge read, "Riggins." "License." "Registration," he snapped, then added, "Step out the vehicle, sir." Clarence's brows lifted, but his tone remained even. "Is there a reason I'm being asked to exit the car? You got a problem following a lawful order?" "I just want to understand the reason," Clarence repeated. The other deputy, Nash, shorter, stockier, came around to Evelyn's side. "Ma'am, keep your hands where I can see them." "They've been right here the whole time, officer," she replied, her voice like silk over steel. Within seconds, Clarence found himself outside, hands on the hood, being patted down like a criminal. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He just watched, eyes steady, noting every movement, every word. "You pack anything you shouldn't be?" Riggins asked, smirking. "We just came back from seeing our grandchildren," Clarence replied. "Jackson, Mississippi." Riggins laughed under his breath. "Long way to drive in a beat-up Buick." Clarence turned his head slightly. "I'm a retired attorney. I'm aware of my rights. You have no probable cause for this search." That hit a nerve. Riggins leaned in. "You think you're smarter than me?" Clarence didn't answer the insult. Not with words. The search turned up nothing. Just a couple of overnight bags, a map, and 2 half-drunk bottles of iced tea. Still, the deputies chuckled as they handed over a citation. "Broken tail light," Riggins said again, smirking. Clarence took the paper. "We'll get it looked at." Back inside the car, they drove in silence for miles. Then Evelyn spoke. "They thought we'd be scared." Clarence's lips pressed into a line. "They don't know who we are." "You write their badge numbers?" He tapped the inside of his jacket. "Every word." She smiled slightly. "Then let's remind them." Clarence didn't speak again until they crossed into Florida. The sky had deepened to twilight, Highway 84 now a memory in the rearview mirror. But his grip on the wheel remained firm, not in fear, but in focus. At Route 133, he made a quiet turn, veering off the interstate like he'd rehearsed this moment before. Back at the Lowndes County Sheriff's Department, Deputy Carl Riggins tore into a greasy gas station burrito, feet kicked up on a scuffed metal desk. "You should have seen the guy," he said through a full mouth. Didn't even raise his voice. Kept quoting law like he was somebody. Officer Nash, scrolling through his phone, barely looked up. Man drove a decade-old Buick. Probably watches Judge Judy and thinks he's Thurgood Marshall. Riggins chuckled, missing the irony completely. Still gave him a citation. Shut him up. But what neither man knew, and what would come back to gut them, was that Clarence Dupree hadn't just memorized the law. He'd helped write parts of it. In Tallahassee, Clarence parked in their driveway, stepped inside, and hung his blazer on the back of a worn kitchen chair. Evelyn was already in her study, pulling down an old file box marked Retired, 2013. Clarence pulled out his brown leather notebook. Every word, every moment, written clean, time-stamped, like a surgeon's log. It wasn't just memory. It was evidence. "You think you're smarter than me?" Evelyn repeated from memory, arms folded near the window. "That's the second time he said it," Clarence murmured. "First when I asked why they needed to search the car. Second when I mentioned probable cause." She turned to him. "And Nash? You think he'll admit anything?" He said. Evelyn looked nervous. "And that alone justified a search." Clarence's fingers drummed once against the notebook, then he reached for the landline, the old kind, with a cord and a number pad that clicked when you dialed. He didn't hesitate. He dialed a number from memory. "Rosalind Thomas," said a warm voice after 3 rings. "Rosalind. It's Clarence Dupree." There was a long pause. Then, almost with reverence, "Well, I'll be. Clarence, I haven't heard your voice in years. Everything all right?" "Not exactly. Evelyn and I were pulled over in Georgia. Aggressive stop. Full search. No cause. I've got names." He gave them. The other end went quiet. "Then, I've heard of Riggins. And Nash. Internal Affairs flagged them last year. Sheriff's office buried it. Let me dig." "Please do. We'll need everything you can find." Clarence hung up and leaned back in his chair. "You're really going back into the arena?" Evelyn asked, her eyes soft, but her posture sharp. "Not for me," Clarence said. "For everyone who couldn't." She didn't try to change his mind. Instead, she reached into her own cabinet, untouched for years, and pulled out a small leather case. She placed it on the desk and opened it. Inside was a polished brass nameplate, Honorable Evelyn Dupree, Circuit Judge. "If we're going in," she said, "we're going in right." In Georgia, Nash flicked a lighter and leaned against the red brick wall of the station, cigarette between his fingers. "You think that old man's gonna complain?" he asked. Riggins scoffed. "Let him. Ain't nobody gonna listen to some bitter retiree." But deep down, Nash knew better. He'd seen Clarence's eyes, not angry, not afraid, but the kind of calm that only came from knowing exactly what was about to happen. What was already happening. Because 3 days later, both officers received identical white envelopes, hand-delivered and stamped with the seal of the United States District Court. Inside. Clarence Dupree vs. Deputies Riggins and Nash, et al. Filed under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. Civil action. Violation of constitutional rights. "Clarence Goddamn Dupree," Riggins muttered, reading the name out loud. "This can't be that Dupree." Nash paled. "Wait. Dupree? As in the Dupree?" Riggins flipped to the second page. "Retired civil rights attorney. Former state prosecutor. Served on federal reform committees." Nash swallowed hard. "We're so screwed." Back in Tallahassee, Clarence's dining table had become a legal war room. Stacks of printouts, manila folders, and law books towered like dominoes waiting to fall in court. Evelyn scanned documents with the same precision she'd once wielded on the bench. "Will file under Section 1983. 4th and 14th Amendment violations. Seek civil damages. Injunctive relief," Clarence explained, tapping with his pen. "You cite Warren vs. United States?" Evelyn asked. "Margin 2. And Terry vs. Ohio for contrast. But we're not stopping there. Rosalind sent over 2 prior complaints from last year. Both buried. We show pattern. Not incident." She smiled, half proud, half stern. You're moving like you never left. Clarence's smile was faint. I never did. I was just waiting for a reason. The doorbell rang. Evelyn answered. Rosalind stood there, jeans, tan blazer, thick folder in hand. Internal affairs files, she said, stepping inside. Redacted, but damning. They laid it all out. Riggins, previously suspended for excessive force. Nash, reprimanded for racial remarks during a 2020 checkpoint. Clarence circled each incident in red. Pattern of conduct. We need the dash cam, Evelyn said. Already subpoenaed. And I flagged a Shell station near the stop. Their security cam may have caught our taillights minutes before the pullover. Rosalind gave a low whistle. You're coming at them from every angle. Clarence looked up, not angry, just resolved. Because it's not just about us. It's about everyone who didn't have a notebook in their pocket. Or a name the system remembers. That night, as they sat on the porch under a warm Florida night sky, Evelyn stirred her coffee slowly. You think they'll take this seriously? They will, Clarence said. Once the courtroom's full of reporters. She didn't smile. But her eyes gleamed. Then let's give them something to report. Sheriff Donald Creedy sat stone-faced in his office, the lawsuit spread across his cluttered desk. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, like it was counting down to impact. He'd seen civil complaints come and go over his 26 years in law enforcement. Most fizzled out. A few made noise for a day or two. But this? This had teeth. Clarence Dupree, he muttered, running a hand down his face. Of all the people to pull over. He picked up the phone. Get Riggins and Nash in my office. Now. When the two deputies entered minutes later, Creedy didn't look up from the document. You two better get a damn good lawyer, he said. Riggins blinked. Wait, Sheriff, are you serious? This is gonna blow over. It was just a traffic stop. Creedy finally looked up, eyes cold. Then why am I holding a 38-page federal complaint citing constitutional violations, civil rights abuse, and prior misconduct that I now have to explain to the media and the state? Nash's mouth opened, then shut. For once, he had nothing. Creedy tossed a manila folder across the desk. That man you pulled over. He's dismantled entire departments with a single televised hearing. I was in uniform when he flipped the state's voter suppression case on its head in '98. So no, this is not just going to blow over. It's already rolling downhill. The room went quiet. And it stayed quiet, all the way through the weeks of pre-trial prep, as more people started paying attention. A journalist from Atlanta picked up the story after spotting Clarence's name in the federal docket. Then a blog. Then a podcast. By the time the court date arrived, the town of Valdosta was buzzing. But Clarence hadn't come for the spotlight. He came for something simpler, accountability. On the morning of the hearing, the line outside the courthouse stretched around the block. Some came because they remembered Clarence Dupree from television years ago. Others came because they'd seen the headline, Retired Civil Rights Attorney Sues Deputies Over Traffic Stop. Inside, Clarence stood in front of the bathroom mirror in a crisp charcoal gray suit. Burgundy tie. The same colors he'd worn when he won his final courtroom case over a decade ago. His face had aged, yes, but the fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed one bit. Outside, Evelyn stood near the courtroom doors in a navy blue dress and a cream blazer. In her hand, her old judge's briefcase. The same one that had sat untouched for years. As Clarence approached, she offered a soft smile. Ready? She asked. He exhaled. As I'll ever be. They walked in together, slow, steady, silent. And every head turned. On the other side of the room, Riggins and Nash sat stiffly in cheap suits. Their county-appointed attorney flipped through a binder, clearly annoyed, clearly unprepared. There was no smugness now. Only a creeping sense of dread. Judge Marcia Delano, a composed woman in her late 50s, entered. The courtroom stood. Court is now in session. Opening arguments began like a cautious chess game. The county's lawyer argued it was a routine traffic stop, following department protocol. A standard citation. Nothing more. Clarence didn't respond. Not yet. But when the moment came, he stood. My wife and I, he said, his voice calm, were pulled over without cause, searched without reason, and insulted without consequence. He paused. Not for drama, but for weight. This case is not about inconvenience. It's about violation. The kind that chips away at a citizen's dignity until they stop asking questions. He took a few slow steps toward the bench. They assumed we were powerless. Disposable. Easy to dismiss. That's the real issue. Judge Delano's pen tapped quietly on her legal pad. She didn't interrupt. She just listened. Clarence concluded, we present not for sympathy, but for truth. Because that's what this room is for. He sat. Evelyn leaned in. That was your opening? Clarence nodded once. Let the evidence do the rest. And then the avalanche began. Rosalind passed up a copy of the Shell station footage, a crisp, time-stamped frame showing their Buick pulling out of the lot. Tail lights glowing perfectly. 6 minutes before the deputies claimed one was broken. Next came the dispatch call logs. Riggins hadn't reported any suspicion before the stop. No call for probable cause. No recorded concern. The citation had been entered 10 minutes after the stop had ended. The courtroom buzzed quietly. Students from Georgia Southern's law school sat in the back, scribbling furiously. Reporters whispered into their phones. Riggins shifted in his seat. Day 2 brought more. Clarence subpoenaed prior civilian complaints against both deputies, buried last year, now unsealed. Riggins had been suspended for excessive force during a traffic stop in Tifton. Nash had received a warning for discriminatory comments made during a DUI checkpoint. Judge Delano took notes. But it was the third day when everything shifted. Clarence called Deputy Riggins to the stand. The man's suit was wrinkled, his collar askew. He sat stiff, eyes darting nervously. Deputy Riggins, Clarence began, what was the reason for pulling over my vehicle on June 4th? Broken tail light, Riggins replied. Which tail light? The, left one. Clarence clicked a remote. The flat screen monitor lit up with the Shell station image. This photo was taken 6 minutes before your stop. Both tail lights clearly illuminated. Can you point out the malfunctioning one? Riggins didn't answer. Clarence continued, did you notify dispatch of any probable cause before initiating the stop? No. Did you refer to me as a smart-mouth old man? I don't recall. I do, Clarence said evenly. Documented in this notebook at 3:37 p.m., just after I declined your search request. Judge Delano said nothing, but her pen had stopped tapping. Clarence turned to Riggins again. And when my wife asked why she had to step out of the vehicle, did you say she looked nervous? Riggins hesitated. Yes. Is appearing nervous grounds for a search under your department policy? Silence. The courtroom leaned forward. Then Nash took the stand. Clarence didn't flinch. Officer Nash, he began, are you aware of a civilian complaint filed against you in March 2020? Yes. What was the nature of that complaint? Something about what I said. Clarence raised an eyebrow. According to the record, you told a black woman at a DUI checkpoint, quote, people like you always look guilty. Objection, the county attorney barked. Sustained, Judge Delano said. Unless tied to pattern. Clarence held up a file. Your Honor, we can establish pattern. She gave a small nod. And then Clarence did what Clarence Dupree was famous for. He laid it all out, methodically, surgically. Complaint logs, field reports, timelines. A dozen small truths that, when stacked together, formed a mountain no department lawyer could scale. By the time Clarence returned to his seat, Nash was practically slouched under the witness table. Riggins wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Evelyn leaned toward Rosalind in the gallery. That's the look of someone who just figured out who they pulled over. Rosalind smirked. Too late now. The courtroom sat in a heavy hush as the judge called for recess. But even during the break, the air didn't clear, it only grew denser with anticipation. Reporters swarmed the lobby. Students clustered around laptops, dissecting legal strategies like it was the championship game. Even court staff moved quieter than usual, aware that something historic was unfolding. When the session resumed the next morning, every seat was filled. The line outside still snaked around the block. Inside were law professors, retired judges, community elders, and off-duty cops in plain clothes, seated quietly in the back row. Everyone waited, not for drama, but for reckoning. Clarence stood slowly, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the front. No notes. No laptop. Just the same notebook he always carried and a memory sharpened by decades of trial work. When I was 9, he began, voice steady, my father was stopped while walking home from work. They said he matched a description. They searched him in the street. Took his tools. Made him lie face down on the sidewalk. He paused. The silence wrapped around every corner of the room. He came home with torn clothes and a cracked voice. I asked him why he didn't yell. Why he didn't fight back. He said. Because if I did, you might never see me again. A woman in the back wiped her eyes. Clarence continued. Years later, I sat in law school reading Terry vs. Ohio, believing the law would protect us. That due process had weight. But case after case proved otherwise, the rules were often bent, twisted, or ignored entirely. And last month, it happened to me. He turned to Judge Delano, his voice never rising. This case isn't about hurt feelings. It's about power. And how that power is misused when two men in uniform think they can decide, on a back road in Georgia, who deserves dignity and who doesn't. He stepped back. No theatrics. No raised voice. Just truth laid bare like gospel. The county attorney tried to rally. Your Honor, he said, standing stiffly, my clients follow department guidelines. If there were any errors in judgment, they occurred under the stress of field conditions. There was no deliberate malice. Clarence didn't respond. But Evelyn leaned slightly toward Rosalind and whispered, that's their angle. No intent, no foul. Classic, Rosalind muttered. As if accidental discrimination is somehow better. The judge called a short recess for deliberation. The room exhaled for the first time in 2 hours. When everyone returned, Judge Delano wasted no time. Her voice was clear, firm, and deliberate. Based on the evidence presented, the testimony reviewed, and the documented misconduct on file, she began, this court finds in favor of the plaintiffs, Clarence and Evelyn Dupree. The room erupted in quiet gasps and murmurs. The actions of Deputies Riggins and Nash violated the 4th and 14th Amendments. This court orders both deputies to be suspended without pay pending formal internal review. The Lawrence County Sheriff's Office is ordered to issue a public apology and to pay damages in the amount of $125,000. She leaned forward slightly. Let this ruling serve as a reminder, badges do not grant immunity from accountability. Her gavel struck. Case closed. Riggins stared forward blankly, face pale. Nash had his head in his hands. Sheriff Creedy, seated 2 rows back trying to be invisible the entire week, rose quietly and walked out, his badge weighing heavier than ever. Clarence turned toward Evelyn, gently reached for her hand, and gave it a soft squeeze. She didn't smile, but her chin lifted as they stood together. A small army of reporters pushed forward. Cameras flashed. Microphones waved. "Mr. Dupree, will you comment? Evelyn, do you have anything to say to the community? Are you satisfied with the ruling?" Clarence raised a hand calmly. "We're not here to make noise," he said. "We're here to make a point. This was never about who we are, it was about what was right." He guided Evelyn past the crowd, their pace slow, steady, unshaken. That night, they sat on the porch again. The evening air was warm, the sound of cicadas rising in waves like applause from the trees. Clarence held the court's decision in his hand. Folded neatly. Victory on paper. Evelyn handed him a mug of tea and sat beside him. "You think they'll change?" she asked softly. "No," Clarence said after a pause. "But someone watching might." She nodded. "Then it's worth it." He placed the letter into his notebook, beside the Shell station photo, the complaint, and the dashcam transcript. A legal time capsule, but more than that, a weapon made of truth. Because for Clarence and Evelyn, this wasn't the end. 2 weeks later, Clarence stood in front of a classroom at Florida A&M College of Law, not behind a podium, just near a whiteboard, sleeves rolled up. 20 students watched him, notebooks open, phones silenced, eyes sharp. "The law doesn't always serve justice," Clarence said slowly. "But it gives you tools. The system isn't broken. It was built this way. So your job isn't just to argue, it's to know where the cracks are, and how to use them." A tall young man in a navy sweatshirt raised his hand. "Mr. Dupree, how did you stay calm during that stop? I mean, knowing what they were doing. Didn't it make you furious?" Clarence nodded. "Of course it did. But anger doesn't win cases. Clarity does. Documentation does. Knowing how they'll twist your words, that's how you beat them." Another student, soft-spoken and neatly braided, asked, "And your wife?" She didn't even look scared. Clarence smiled gently. "Deborah's never been scared of men like that. She's seen worse in her courtroom than those two could ever dish out." He paused, then added quietly, "Truth is, it wasn't the first time. Just the first time we said, enough." After the court victory, things changed, not just for Clarence and Evelyn, but for the entire county. The ruling didn't disappear like most headlines do. It spread. Local news ran evening specials. Regional podcasts aired interviews with legal experts. And in barbershops, churches, and grocery store parking lots across Georgia and Florida, people whispered the same thing. "Did you hear what Clarence Dupree did?" At first, the sheriff's department tried to contain the damage. A half-hearted apology was released, 2 paragraphs on county letterhead, buried in a Friday afternoon news cycle. But it backfired. The community saw right through it. And more importantly, they remembered the names. Riggins. Nash. Creedy. Sheriff Creedy stopped showing up at public events. He skipped the monthly town hall, sent someone else to speak at the high school graduation, and kept his door closed more often than open. Internal Affairs launched new investigations, not because they wanted to, but because the lawsuit had forced them. Meanwhile, Clarence and Evelyn had no interest in the spotlight. They returned to their usual routines, long walks in the neighborhood, volunteering at the local legal clinic, and sipping black coffee on the porch. But something stirred within them. It started as a conversation over lunch. Then a few pages of notes on yellow paper. Then an outline. Within weeks, Evelyn had drafted the founding charter for a new nonprofit. Gideon South Legal Aid Initiative. Named after the landmark case Gideon vs. Wainwright, it would offer pro bono legal support to people in rural communities facing abusive policing practices. "We're not trying to change the whole world," Evelyn told Rosalind during one meeting, "just level the field for the ones always forced to stand at the bottom." Rosalind raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to run it?" You were retired, remember? Evelyn smirked. Retirement was peaceful. But this? This is necessary. Word spread fast. Law students from across Florida applied for internships. Retired attorneys reached out offering to mentor. Even a few former public defenders quietly expressed interest in returning to the field, for this cause. Back in Georgia, Riggins and Nash were no longer smug. They each hired their own attorneys. County representation had backed off, citing conflict of interest. Riggins avoided eye contact at the station. Nash stopped smoking by the brick wall. Rumors swirled, both men faced permanent decertification if the internal findings confirmed Clarence's testimony. But it wasn't just about them anymore. Across the county, officers began acting differently. Stops became more procedural. Dash cams, once glitchy, mysteriously started working again. And traffic tickets declined by nearly 18% in the following 2 months. It wasn't fear. It was awareness. Clarence had struck a nerve, not with a speech or a protest, but with precision, precedent, and a pen. One afternoon, Clarence sorted through the week's mail at the dining table. Junk flyers. A water bill. A letter with no return address. He paused, curiosity piqued. He opened it. Inside was a single sentence written in slanted print. I watched what you did. I'm applying to law school. No name. No city. Just that one line. Clarence read it again. Then a third time. Slowly, he folded it and tucked it into his notebook beside the verdict, the photo of the taillights, and the citation from Riggins. He stepped onto the porch, letter in hand. Evelyn was already there, rocking gently, sipping tea. He passed her the letter. She read it, then looked up. Told you it mattered. Clarence sat beside her. The wind moved lightly through the trees. Their neighborhood was quiet, too quiet for a moment of such gravity. But that's how real change arrives. Not with parades. Not with headlines. But with steady, undeniable shifts. People always say the law is blind, Clarence said after a while. But maybe it's not. Maybe it just sees what it wants to, until someone makes it look harder. Evelyn didn't say anything. She just reached for his hand. They sat like that, quiet and still, two warriors of the law who'd never swung with fists, only facts. And won. Within months of the court ruling, Clarence and Evelyn found themselves fielding calls and emails from places they hadn't heard from in years. A public defender in Savannah wrote a handwritten thank you letter. A professor from Howard University asked to include the Dupree case in her constitutional law syllabus. Even an old colleague from the Justice Department sent a short note that simply said, "You never lost the touch." But the most surprising call came from a major legal conference organizer out of Atlanta. "We'd like you to be the keynote speaker," the coordinator said. "Topics up to you. The theme this year is, accountability in modern policing." Clarence declined at first. He wasn't interested in being anyone's mascot. But it was Evelyn who convinced him otherwise. "Speak," she said, folding laundry one evening. "Let them hear the words from someone who's actually walked the road. Too many voices out there with no skin in the game." He finally agreed. The speech, delivered to a packed auditorium of legal professionals, was titled, "The Paper Trail to Justice, Why the Smallest Detail Still Matters." It received a standing ovation. But Clarence hadn't come to inspire. He came to arm people, lawyers, students, even police officers, with tools. The law was his sword. The truth, his shield. Back in Tallahassee, the Gideon South Legal Aid Initiative opened its modest downtown office. The front windows were bare. No gold plaques. Just a simple black sign with white letters. Inside, volunteers bustled with intake forms, legal briefs, and schedules. Evelyn ran the administrative side. Clarence handled strategy. Rosalind served as operations lead and occasionally, moral compass. Their first real case came from a single mother in nearby Jefferson County. Her teenage son had been detained without cause, twice. No charges. No records. Just routine checks. Routine. That word again. Clarence didn't just take the case. He sent a demand letter, filed a formal civil complaint, and by week's end, had the sheriff's office issuing a public statement and policy review. The message was clear: the Duprees hadn't won a fluke case. They had drawn a line in the sand. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of the courtroom battle were still unfolding. Deputy Riggins resigned quietly, avoiding a full IA review. He claimed it was for personal reasons. But everyone knew the truth: he wouldn't survive a second round. Nash was reassigned to desk duty pending final disciplinary action, stripped of his field responsibilities. Sheriff Creedy tried to hold on to control. He launched community outreach campaigns, posed for pictures at school fundraisers, and smiled for cameras at charity events. But it wasn't enough. The damage was done. The old power dynamics, unquestioned badges, unchecked behavior, were cracking. And every time someone mentioned that case, people remembered the name Dupree. One crisp Sunday morning, Clarence and Evelyn sat in their church's fellowship hall. After service, a young man in his early 20s approached. He looked nervous, holding a manila folder to his chest. "Mr. Dupree?" he asked. "I don't want to interrupt, but I'm going to law school. Because of you." Clarence shook his hand. "Then don't let it be because of me," he said. "Let it be because of the next person who can't fight back. You fight for them." The young man nodded, his eyes wide. "Yes, sir." Clarence sat back down. Evelyn gave him a knowing look, then sipped her tea. "You've become a legend," she teased. Clarence chuckled. Legends are just old people with good memories. But he knew. He knew this was more than a moment. It was momentum. Not just in courtrooms or classrooms, but in conversations happening at kitchen tables, across fences, and in late-night text threads where people finally asked, "What can we do?" And the answer wasn't protest. It was prepare. That evening, Clarence sat on the back porch with Rosalind. The sun dipped low, streaking the sky with shades of gold and rust. "I keep thinking," Rosalind said, "what if you hadn't written in that notebook? What if you just let it go?" Clarence looked out at the horizon. "Then they'd still be laughing," he said. "Still pulling people over. Still assuming power means immunity." "But now?" she asked. "Now they know," Clarence said. "There's always someone watching. Someone writing it down." Aunts passed, but the momentum didn't. The Dupree case became more than a court file, it became a blueprint. At law schools across the South, students cited it in mock trials. Community organizers used it as a training example. Civil rights groups distributed excerpts during outreach seminars in small towns. Even departments in other counties quietly revised their stop-and search procedures, spooked by how surgical Clarence's approach had been. And through it all, Clarence and Evelyn never sought the spotlight, but the spotlight came anyway. One Friday morning, a producer from a national news outlet called the Gideon South office. "We're running a series on modern legal activism," the woman said. "We'd like to feature Mr. and Mrs. Dupree." Clarence shook his head. "We're not activists. We're just people who know how to use the law." Still, they agreed to a quiet sit-down interview. No stage. No lights. Just a wooden porch, 2 folding chairs, and 2 old souls with a lifetime of wisdom. The segment aired on Sunday night. It ended with Evelyn saying one simple sentence. "We didn't want revenge. We wanted accountability. And the law, when you know how to use it, is still the most powerful tool we have." That quote caught fire. People started mailing letters again. Young interns. Parents. Veterans. A retired bus driver from Alabama sent a check for $20 and a note, "Wish I had y'all around when they dragged me off my route in '79. God bless." Clarence pinned the note to the bulletin board at Gideon South. Not for pride, for purpose. Then came the phone call Clarence didn't expect. It was from the Department of Justice. "We're forming a task force to investigate patterns of unconstitutional policing in rural counties," said the voice. "We'd like your insight. Not as a figurehead. As counsel." Clarence sat with the offer. Thought about his age, his pace, his peace. Then Evelyn said, "If you're asking yourself whether you still have something to give, the answer's in the mirror. You're not tired. You're just used to being underestimated." He smiled. "I'll do it," he told the DOJ the next day. "But only if I can bring my own people." They agreed. Rosalind came on board as legal coordinator. Two of Clarence's brightest former students joined as junior analysts. And once a month, they gathered in a windowless room in D.C., reviewing records, timelines, patterns. Because the fight wasn't over. It had just moved to a different battlefield. Late one evening, back in Tallahassee, Clarence stepped into his study. Evelyn was already there, sorting through documents. He opened his notebook. The old brown one. Worn at the edges, but still whole. He flipped past the citation. Past the taillight photo. Past the verdict letter. Then paused at the back cover. There, tucked carefully in the last page, was that anonymous note. "I watched what you did. I'm applying to law school." Clarence read it again. Then he added a new entry beneath it. "If you're reading this and wondering whether it's worth it, it is. Not because it's easy. But because silence never changed anything. And your voice, when used right, is louder than a siren. CD. This is more than a story about a traffic stop. It's about what happens when quiet dignity meets reckless power, and refuses to back down." Clarence and Evelyn Dupree reminded the world that you don't need a badge to stand for justice. You just need the truth, and the will to use it. As Clarence said best. The law sees what it wants to, until someone makes it look harder. If this story moved you, share it. If it inspired you, talk about it. If it made you see the world a little clearer, subscribe to True Echo. We bring real voices to light. And real change to life.